Well, welcome to the CentreCourt MBA Festival in Toronto, both to those of you that are joining us this afternoon in downtown Toronto, but of course the many hundreds, if not thousands of you that actually follow on the live stream or are catching this video later on. It's great to have such a global audience with us. It was the Toronto Film Festival this week, and here at the Glen Gold Studios, I think they welcomed Angelina Jolie and Helen Mirren. So top that, where were we going to take it? So of course for this panel we had to ensure that we had the same sort of glamorous quality, and I'm delighted to welcome such an international group of admissions directors from the top schools. Immediately to my right, Maria Jimena Rivera, who is newly the Managing Director and Director of Admissions for the full-time MBA program at University of Toronto Rotman.
Thank you, happy to be here.
I'm glad that you could find it, right? It was just down the road.
But Angelina Jolie, but I'll try my best.
Possibly overrated, but Linda Harding, it's great to have you with us, Linda, who's from Northeastern de Kim. So thank you for getting in from Boston to be with us this afternoon. Another local school, John Derek, you go more as JD, right? JD Clark, who's the Executive Director of the Master's Programs at Ivy Business School. Thanks for joining us. And the furthest traveled is Mar Hurtado de Mendoza, who is the Global Head of International Development at the IE Business School out of Madrid. And perhaps we can start with you, Mar, because with such an international business school and such a range of programs, as you look at this sort of changing and evolving demand for business education, the full-time MBA, 1 year, 2 year, the online MBA where the school is a real pioneer, what are you seeing in terms of demand for each of those programs?
Well, we continue seeing demand for international MBA. Our program is a year-long program, and so we see candidates still very interested in getting to the program, the full-time program, and going as fast as possible to the market. We're seeing candidates that are very eager to sort of learn how to navigate this very changing environment, professional environment, and so very curious people. And we recruit all over the world, so we are seeing increased demand for our programs coming from Asia Pacific, from Middle East and Africa, which makes our classes very diverse and very interesting. And we are also seeing interest for the blended programs, obviously for a different type of profile, right? Those that don't want to leave the markets, and especially we see demand from the markets that are going well in terms of the labor market. So people can't afford to get out of the market to do a full-time program. But I mean, we see consistent demand over the years for both formats, different profiles, but for both of them.
Right, so the 1 year program in Europe that's gaining traction, you're also top ranked for the online MBA program, and is that the same audience, or is it a distinct audience that then is considering that sort of very flexible online format?
If we look into our global MBA, which would be something more or less equivalent in terms of the working experience, we're seeing a very similar profile. Just the difference is those that don't want to leave the marketplace and do a program. But the profile is very similar. We get the diversity. It's also people that are okay with getting the blended education, so they're fine with the on-campus and off-campus. For the full-time MBA, we're also seeing those students that, besides being able to take 1 year out of the market, they want to get the experience of living in Madrid for one full year and actually get the most out of what the school has to offer. But in terms of professional profiles, diverse backgrounds, diverse cultures, we see the same profile.
Right. In terms of dynamics in the Canadian market, the case study was invented nearly 100 years ago, and Ivy is one of the best proponents of the case study. So, JD, what are you seeing at the Ivy Business School?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of interest in Canada, and so I would say, especially with international candidates, a lot of interest in Canada. Many of our international students, and I would say the large majority, are interested in staying and immigrating to Canada afterwards. So, all of the Canadian schools, and Maria can add to it as well, is that we're seeing a double-digit growth in application volume with international students. Particularly, I would say India, Africa, Southeast Asia is where we see that growth, and it's great because it adds a diversity to the classrooms, which is fantastic, but a diversity to the Canadian economy as well. And these students do fantastic. I always say to them when they, think about doing an MBA outside of their home country is don't think about yourself as an international candidate, really think about yourself as a global MBA student. I think that's really, one of the things that they bring to the table is that important diversity and that diversity of experiences. So we're seeing a lot of growth, particularly on the international side.
Right, we very often talk about outcomes with any education, but I think particularly for the MBA, do you find that then, in individuals that are now targeting top Canadian business schools like your own, that opportunity to then stay, the sort of the visa policy locally all plays into the choices that they're making? Exactly.
I think I just came back last week from a trip to Africa to meet with candidates, and the draw of being able to stay in Canada, being able to immigrate in Canada, and there's a tremendous amount of not only do students get a postgraduate work permit, which allows them to sort of bridge to get permanent residence and permanent residence on a pathway to citizenship. So I think, first of all, they're kind of looking at where do they want to kind of maybe settle after the MBA program, and then looking at, okay, that's the location I want to focus on. And so, how do I decide amongst those different schools and what's the fit for me coming into that marketplace?
And as we look at the relevant job skills, Linda, we live in a sort of a globalized world. Amazon reaches $1 trillion valuation and has built their success on a supply chain. Of course, that's one of the great strengths of Northeastern and supply chain. Do you feel that those sort of specific strengths are then one of the distinct appeals of business education? I'm looking to really build my skill sets in this area and segment.
Matt, that's so important, is to have a focus, especially if you're considering a full-time MBA program, because it goes so quickly to understand what your end goal is. So having concentrations like we do at Northeastern, concentrations in supply chain management or healthcare management, very specific, really helps individuals transition, especially those who say, I'm an engineer, I want to move into the business side. Maybe I'm looking at investment management, maybe I'm looking at supply chain management, but how do I transition? So full-time MBA is a great way, if it has that concentration, that focus, to do that very quickly.
Right. Maria, of course, just in the new position, so perhaps first impressions of Rotman, what drew you to the school, and also, within that global market, design thinking and other things that the school has really then sort of stood out. So how are you enjoying the role at Rotman?
I'm loving it. So my family and I moved here from the United States intentionally because we wanted to settle in Canada and went through the permanent residency process, just like a lot of our international students are doing as part of their MBA search. And the place of Toronto is so powerful, and the fact that you are in a microcosm of the world has great benefits as a staff member working day to day with my colleagues and seeing the students working with people who are the best from around the world. So we're loving it. Rotman is large. It's up usually about 350 students per class. So you get a lot of great dynamism and great thinking that happens by having those diversity of viewpoints in the classroom, shoulder to shoulder. So it's been a great experience, and it's a very innovative place, and you can feel things happening. You kind of feel an energy in the air. And so it's been a wonderful transition, and I'm happy to be there.
Great. JD, you were talking about a double-digit sort of admissions increases, and we call this the admissions panel. Talk us through a typical admissions process, for sort of that round as people are clicking submit, how you're then working behind the scenes to bring together the diversity and the talent in that classroom.
Yeah, I think, and I'll talk about it from a candidate perspective, because I think the biggest thing that you recommend to candidates as they consider schools is don't let the school get to know you when you first submit your application, is to really start that dialogue early on. Talk to students that are in the program, talk to alumni, talk to admissions staff, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to a fit on both sides. I mean, we're looking for candidates that, will bring a dynamic to the classroom and really engaged in the learning process. But it's also, the candidates looking at the fit for that particular school as well. And so the best thing that individuals can do is sort of engage at the school right at the beginning. And then as you go through the process is to really get to understand, more about the school, what they're looking for, ultimately right from that point, before the application stage, and then the admissions interview. And the admissions interview is really an opportunity for people to bring, what's done on paper to life. And, the one thing I will say is that, there's no typical candidate that everyone's looking for, right? And there's not that typical candidate people look for. So I will end with this piece of advice, is that never ever self-select yourself out from a school or from doing an MBA because you think, well, I'm not a typical candidate that school's looking for, or I'm not a typical candidate that I think that there's an MBA program. If you think about all our programs, we got great stories of people that come from very diverse backgrounds. And so that adds a lot to the experience. One of we had a student last year who was a trained chef with a master's degree in philosophy. And it's incredible about what that diversity can bring to your classroom. So. Right.
Well, coming from a man with a non-traditional pair of socks, I think that has even more
I knew
more
I'd
weight
be on stage,
to
so I decided to, that was the accessory I put a lot of thought on today. So.
Mar, as you look at online programs, the full-time MBA program, also a school that has, 120 nationalities, something United Nations in terms of the international dimension. So are you then really looking for that sort of global mindset, and even perhaps how you might orient them towards full-time, online, or even more for younger masters in management? So how do you sort of go through that process, and what are you looking for?
Well, in terms of diversity and the global mindset that you were mentioning, for us it's actually very important, and we work really hard to bring that diversity into the classes, because we think that's one of the ways in which we can bring value besides what you're going to learn in class. We truly believe that you learn as much from the professors, if not more, if they can't hear me. That's from from your classmates actually, than from the professors. All the different perspectives that the students bring, and that's why we have now 30 offices around the world. It's just to make sure that we're bringing the diversity that we want to bring into the classes. In terms of orienting the students towards a full-time or a part-time MBA, as I mentioned before, we try to bring exactly the same diversity into the full-time and the online MBA. Whether you should do one or the other one, it very much depends on you and what you're looking to get out of it, and in which moment in your career are right now. That will make you choose one or the other one. In terms of the Master in Management, that's for people with fewer years of experience, between 0 and 2 years of experience. So it's sort of that first stage. And again, the work that we do for the full-time MBA to bring diversity, we do it across all our programs: business school, law school, international relations.
Right. Yeah. Linda, you were saying, of course, Boston is at the sort of the epicenter of medtech, biotech, and business. Yes, you have certainly more students than any other city in the US, perhaps. So with that inherent attraction of studying in Boston, tapping into that community, in terms of applying round 1 versus round 2 versus round 3, as you look to sort of capture the enthusiasm, the motivation, the alignment with the school and its culture, does it matter when you apply in the admission cycle?
It does. It does. If you're an international student, most of the schools in Boston, I'll talk about it from that perspective, when they're building their class, they'll say, okay, 35% of my class or 30% of my class can be an international student, but then that's where the majority of the applicants come from. So you certainly want to apply early as an international student, November, certainly before February. To be considered for scholarship money, that's another piece, a big piece of the pie. So there's a limited amount of scholarship pool for students, so applying early certainly gives you a little bit of an edge as an international student.
Right. But as a committee, knowing from sort of past years of experience, there's still place for applicants in later rounds. You don't fill all the places in
There's
round
place
1.
for there's right until June. There's places for everyone, and then it just comes down to visa requirements. So if there's a particular, again, like many of the other schools, we're looking for a specific profile. If there's someone that just stands out, a solid work experience, their goals are clear, they have potential in being able to speak about what they can do and how they can do it and where they want to go, we can always find room. There's always room for one more, Matt.
Right. a wonderful legacy with Nikki, with Jamie, and now your turn as the gatekeeper at Rotman. So talk us through that sort of day in the life, and how does the team sort of talk to one another? You were talking, JD, about bringing those personalities to life off the page. So what sort of discussions go on behind the scenes?
Sure. So we really try and get to know our applicants as best we can, and there's a lot of intentional tools that we use to try and make that happen so people come to life off of the page, as you mentioned. So for example, the Kira informational interview that we do, and I think was pioneered at Rotman, and we used at my prior school as well, is a great way for you to show us a little bit about your personality and for us to get to know you outside of just the four corners of a paper. So no, we have a team of 6 wonderful assistant directors who have decades of experience in admissions. We come together and discuss our applicants and advocate for our applicants and get to learn about the regions that every assistant director represents. And we sit down and also make scholarship decisions at the same time as we're making admissions decisions. So it's a holistic review looking at merit, and it's great fun to be able to see the great amount of talent that is out there and start putting the class together.
Right. We talk about, obviously it'd be great if everyone could arrive in Boston, in Madrid, they'll see this. How many stories is the new campus going to be? It's you're going to dominate the Madrid skyline. How can you tell when someone really has done that research? Coming to Madrid, visiting the campus is a great statement, but perhaps not always within reach for all of the applicants. So what is your advice to getting to know the school, Mark?
I think it's very similar with some of the things that we've mentioned here, which is do your research. There's a lot of information online, for sure. Everyone at the school is more than happy to connect you with alumni because not every business school is the same. Everyone has its own DNA, and you have to see whether you fit with the school. And it's where you feel you go and do a program for 1 year, you're an alumni for your entire life, right? And you're going to be part of the alumni network. You want to make sure that you want to be part of that family. So it's there are a lot of opportunities online, offline, coming to these type of events, and also connecting with the alumni network, which is very easy to reach, to get to know the school from the inside, what it's really about, what's the vibe that you feel when you go there, besides the core courses and the classes.
Right. JD, can you be too young? Can you be too old to do an MBA, full-time MBA program?
I think it depends on the stage somebody's at their career. And I think, to answer your question, I think there is never that part of too young, because it depends on what experience that you bring. So, a lot of schools will have admission standards on the number of years of work experience. It's not as much about those years as it is what you've done. So there are people that are in our program rate at that 2-year minimum mark, but what they've accomplished is incredible in those 2 years. I do think on the older end that it's really about making sure that everyone's sort of at that same stage in their career within your classroom, but it's also about making sure that you're at that stage in your career that will resonate with recruiters as well. And so, all of us probably have programs outside of just a full-time MBA program that really depends on where you are in your career, what stage do you resonate with recruiters. And so, for us, for instance, when you're over that 10-year mark of experience, is that you're looking more at an executive MBA format. So to answer your question, I think each program really depends on sort of what age and stage somebody is at in their career. And that's something that we work with candidates on very early in the process, and that's why it's important to engage with individuals from the school, is to understand, what are they looking for, what's sort of the profile within each of the programs, and getting to know what your goals are and your objectives are and which programs may fit there, whether it's a full-time MBA, part-time MBA, maybe an executive MBA, and maybe even a specialized master's as well.
Right. So if Linda, we take the sort of the applicant in their early 30s thinking about school, are you then in the admissions office sort of working with colleagues in career services to see how achievable, reassuring somebody's post-MBA career goals are?
Correct. We actually have a director of a director of career services that sits on the admission committee as we review the candidates. So if it's something outside of the usual, we'll turn to the director and say, what do you think? Is this doable? Is this possible? Is this a student recruitable? Is this what the companies are looking for? And based on that feedback, we'll make a decision.
Right.
And to JD's point, there's a program for everyone. So each program has a specific design for where someone is in their career path. The executive MBA, the part-time MBA, the online MBAs are often better options or choices for someone with more senior experience.
Right, right. Because we don't want, having made that sort of investment, they're sitting outside career services saying, how come I'm not getting these interviews with the consulting firm, whatever. So do you have that same sort of perspective on the transition that someone's looking to make?
Yes, absolutely. So similar to Linda, we have Career Center representatives involved in our admissions decisions because we definitely want to make sure that the goals of the student are aligning with the goals of that program and at the right stage of their career. And we also want to challenge people to come and get their full-time MBA and think about maybe shifting careers. So it's not necessarily just moving up the ladder in their selected industry, but to challenge themselves to try something they may not have tried before and to learn another industry and another skill set. And they might be surprised. They might end up leaving in a different path than when they started. And that's great because it's supposed to be a transformational experience.
Right, right. Any admissions panel at some point is going to bring out the four-letter word of the GMAT. And in San Francisco last week, actually, Kirsten Moss, her great concern at Stanford GSB, the school has this eye-watering GMAT average, and she's concerned that people may choose not to apply to her school because they see that average and say, I don't think that I could reach that kind of score. Now, one of IE's approaches with such an international applicant pool is to offer options. GMAT is one of them for the full-time MBA program, but Martel said a little bit about some of the other alternatives and ways to demonstrate the aptitude and academics for the program.
Sure. Well, as part of our admissions process, we also have some things like the career assessments, where you actually get to know the person more lively than before the interview. And we also have our own admissions test that you can take instead of the GMAT. There are still candidates that prefer to submit the GMAT, and I mean, can agree with you. It's always about the score that I get and whether I can get in or not. And the more we say, it's a holistic approach. You might get a super good GMAT score, and this might not be your school because, or you might not be the profile we're looking for because we're looking at you as an individual, and the GMAT is just one piece of information. It's not the determinant piece of information. And so yes, I mean, in our school you have the opportunity to present the GMAT. You can also take our own test. And
just obviously you want to, and any full-time MBA program is going to cover discounted cash flow. There'll be certain core sort of quant courses in the program. So your internal test, how does it differ from the GMAT in what you're looking to assess in an applicant? We are looking into your reasoning skills and mathematical skills, and not necessarily whether you know how to solve this problem that you have to remember math from when you were going to school. And actually, if I may put my own example, I'm a graduate from law school and international relations, and I did the MBA, and actually I was a little bit scared about the financial accounting and etc. But I mean, the MBA is done for that, for people with different backgrounds, and I did quite well. And I got the support from the professors and my classmates, and I mean, it's not rocket science, right? Right. And Ivy, of course, with the case method and looking at a corporate situation from so many different dimensions, where does the GMAT fit into the sort of skill sets that you're looking for?
I think it goes back to what you were saying, is that you have to have some. You want to make sure that when we admit people into the program, and all of us do, is that we want to make sure that you have the academic rigor behind it, that we feel confident that you can handle the academic side of it. And the GMAT is only one measure of that. I mean, you have your undergraduate grades, graduate degree grades if you have one of those. You're also looking at the type of work experience, maybe you have designations, and so it all plays into it to kind of think about, is that academic rigor there? I'll just say one point about the GMAT before moving on, Matt, is that the GMAT can also be powerful, because another question we get is, what's your minimum GPA? Right? And what is... And we are trained from a very young age, if you don't get good grades in school, then you may not go to a good university. If you don't get good grades in university, you can't go to a master's programs. But the thing about the MBA program is we have this wonderful thing called the GMAT or the GRE that a lot of programs accept as well. So if you have below average grades, you can actually compensate for that by writing a stronger GMAT. And so I think that, back to your point that you were saying, is the GMAT's only one measure of it, but it is that thing where candidates tend to be very anxious about. Right. And I think that, what candidates have to kind of go into this process is that, the GMAT is really only one thing that the schools look at. There's lots of other things around it.
And perhaps business school even more than law school or other graduate schools where we talked earlier about bringing 4, 5, 6 years of professional experience and that part of your story to it. Now, I think Rotman will also consider, is it the CFA, as a demonstration of the kind of quant skills that will just make sure?
Yes, if you have a CFA level 3 designation, then we don't need to look at your GMAT score. Right, and we'll also take LSAT score for our JD MBA dual degree candidates and the GRE as well.
Right. And if you like the profile and the GMAT or GREs, maybe 40, 50 points, will you go back to the person and say, hey, have another crack at the test because we like everything else, right? You'll provide that
I don't know that we would go back to the candidate. Sometimes the candidate asks us, do you think it's worth it for me to do that? It has to be candidate initiated. Right. And it really depends on, did that person do everything they could? Were they as prepared as they could have been? Or did they have a bad day that day? And if they think that there could be a significant difference, then I would encourage them to try again.
Right. Right. So just one point. Some people sort of discount recommenders in this process. And Linda, it's always, they'll be enthusiastic and supportive and they'll say that, they're a great applicant to the school and that the schools kind of discount recommendations. But a really strong, thoughtful, insightful letter of recommendation, it makes a world of difference, right?
It makes a world of difference, especially from someone who works with you. So it's interesting, someone will say, can I have a faculty member give me a recommendation? Unless you worked for that faculty member, you may not want to, at an MBA level, you may not want to have a professor because they have these template letters of recommendation that talk about your grades and how well you did in class, but that's really not as much what we're looking for from those letters of recommendation. We're looking for someone who can point to your leadership skills, someone who can point to a project that you led, the results you produced, who can stand by you and say, this is why this person would be a great senior manager, this is why we're recommending them for an MBA. A strong recommendation goes a long way.
Right. In terms of language, and of course so many international applicants to a school like IE, perhaps here in Canada and North America, the word choice of awesome, outstanding, remarkable, whereas a German or a Swedish recommender might sort of say, well, their performance is quite satisfactory, which in Swedish terms means that they were off the charts, how good they were. Yes. So, are you mindful of who's writing the recommendation and the sort of the cultural biases and language that they use?
Definitely. And the admissions team is very, very used to dealing with very different profiles, very diverse profiles, not only in the recommendation letters, even in the interview. When you're doing an interview online and, and you're doing with a candidate from somewhere in Africa, and maybe they are not even in their own house, they are in a shared space, and there is noise, and you're expecting the candidate to be, if what you're expecting is the candidate to be very proper in a proper place, well, think about what it is, to be somewhere else where you might not have that opportunity. So definitely we take into account the cultural differences, And what we're looking in the recommendation letters, again, is to get to know the candidate a little bit better, so someone that really knows you, and it makes sense with the rest of the application, right? It's coherent with what you're seeing. So if you take that as part of the whole process, it makes a lot more sense.
Right, and work with those recommenders. JD, anything that you ever seen in a recommendation like, oh no, you know, they might have wanted to do this a little differently?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes you see that people do with recommendation letters is they get somebody that may come with the name or the prestige around it, but may not know and observe the qualities of the person. So back to your point, it's about the thoughtful reflection and the thoughtful feedback. And so somebody might get, you know, I worked in an organization, I got the senior vice president to fill it out that may have seen you in a couple of meetings because they think that name will help out. And I think a theme that everyone's talked about is it's this idea of alignment. That what you want to do is make sure that as you kind of explain the accomplishments and impact that you're proud of in your application form, because all the schools are looking at more than just what you do at work. It's really about the impact and accomplishments you've had. Make sure you choose recommenders and references that have observed that, and make sure that that alignment is there through the process, I think is incredibly important.
Right. Right. With that, Linda, there are certain profiles that are perhaps certainly well represented in the admissions pool. You know, whether it's the consultants or the bankers, the engineers, you know, perhaps the Indian male engineer profile, then the schools will see many of. So always this challenge to stand out in that pool. What is your advice to them to appropriately stand out?
Have clear goals. To JD's, you really have to be cohesive about why you're considering this MBA now and where you want it to take you. So whether you are an engineer who wants to go into corporate finance or just work in the US in product development, you have to be able to really state that goal and show us the path on how you've worked toward that end. And I think that makes all the difference because we want candidates who are 100% prepared for this and not just another banker. Right. So 100% prepared. So show us how you are growing as a leader. Show us how you are educating yourself on a continual basis, how you are growing both in your career and as an individual.
Right, right. Maria, anything that you would add to that in terms of how they put their best foot forward and among all of the EY, PwC, KPMG, Deloitte profiles, that they might capture your attention?
Sure. I think that there's great value, as was mentioned before, and when you're putting together your resume, making sure it's not a job description that just lays out your duties, but the impact that you've had at that company or that organization, because that's what's going to distinguish you regardless of the industry you were in. And we're trying to bring in people who are going to be leaders and bring that same kind of grit and resilience and motivation and leadership to the classroom and future careers. So think more about that instead of hiring for the position, a job description, more outcomes.
Right.
Yes.
So with the shared experience on this panel, and before we take questions from the audience and bring on the deans, either framed as one essential piece of advice or framed as one thing not to do. Mara, what would be the one piece of advice or the one thing that candidates should not do as they go through the admissions process?
Don't recycle applications, please. It's very obvious when you're not, when you're using the same essays over and over, or the same application type. Just make sure that you do your research. You know to which school you're applying and why that's the school that you're applying to, and why you think you fit, and how the specific program you're applying to fits in your career. Right. I mean, take it individually, because it's very obvious when someone is just filling in the blank spaces. Right.
And this idea of, that they're applying to Chicago Booth and they accidentally put Kellogg, and obviously that jumps out. But, I mean, can you tell in terms of someone is really talking to you and your school? I mean, I remember you had 12 or 13 essay questions. You could choose among them, talk about the future of the city. It was a very thoughtful opportunity that you gave applicants. So can you really tell? You can, yeah. Throughout the admissions process, you can. And maybe not only in the application, but also during the interview process, you can tell. Because what you're trying to see in the application is, as I said, how the applicant thinks that they fit in your school and in the program, and why your specific program is what they need. And the programs are
different.
Yeah.
They all have different attributes, right? So when someone is telling you, I think I want to go to your school because you have a very entrepreneurial mindset, or like talk about your values. I mean, they've done the work and they have actually put thought into it, and want to be part of it, right?
Right. JD, I'm sure you'd add to that, but either the pitfalls or the one piece that you always want to share with applicants?
I think it's a similar theme, is that you want to make sure you're your authentic, true self, and not giving the answers or responses you think the school is looking for or what the school wants, because eventually it will catch up. I think, when you get into an interview stage, as they start probing about your experience, if that experience isn't deep to you, or you're giving us what you think the answers weren't, those stories eventually collapse. And I think that's really important, is that you approach this by saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm looking for, here are what my authentic experiences were, and at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're looking at a school that's a good fit for you. And so just make sure in this whole process is that your voice doesn't get lost, and I think that's really important.
Right. I mean, those TV series, the police dramas where ultimately the person kind of breaks down and confesses. But you're saying that if it isn't a sort of a coherent structure and a very personal voice, at some point you will pick up on those inconsistencies.
Yeah, I mean, part of the interview process in all of our schools is getting to know your experiences more, right? So if you think about the interview process being, so I'll give a TIFF analogy, right? Is that the interview process is like the movie, and your application process leading up to it is the trailer to the movie. And so when you get to that interview process, if they're asking you about something maybe you mentioned in an essay or in your video interview or something in your resume, if that experience isn't something that made an impact on you, or wasn't a deep experience, then as soon as they start probing on that experience, is that story starts to collapse around you. And so I think that's really, back to your thing about being in that police room. I mean, that's what naturally happens if there isn't depth around that. So
if I pick up on the trailer, Linda, if there are some movies where they've put all of the best parts of the movie in the trailer, and the 2-hour version can be a disappointment. Do you often see applicants that try to squeeze in everything, too much, give you too much detail because they're so eager to impress you? And how might they have better handled that situation, Linda?
I think what you want to do is go back to that point, and you're exactly right. There's a lot of candidates that all of us have, limits on the amount that you can talk about essays. In the video interview, you have a set amount of time that you can talk, and so it's like, how do I fit all that in? Is think about your experiences and tying them together and the themes around it. And so, be very sort of thoughtful about, what's the most important thing that I want to kind of give a headline or a teaser about me, and be confident that through the process that you'll have more of an opportunity to kind of expand on that. And I think having that mindset helps a lot.
Right.
So.
Linda, with applicants and
good tips. The essay and the interview are the places where you can make the biggest impact and where most of the mistakes are made. I would say, if I could give you a tip, is who are you being when you go to your interview? Are you being your future, or are you being your past? Are you acting in accordance with someone who's ready for a senior management role? So how are you dressed? Do you have your story down? Do you have clear questions? There's nothing more annoying to me, nothing more annoying, because I live in Boston with all these B schools, when someone in their interview asks me, well, tell me what's different about your school. We expect you to already know that, because we know you've applied to this school, this school, this school. So don't ask the admissions director that. Come to us and tell us why you're applying to our school and not what's different from us and other schools. Really, or have it think it out in a different way.
Right, Northeastern, Northwestern, it's just
Northeastern,
geography, right?
Northwestern.
Really do your homework. Yeah, great. And Maria?
Sure. I would just add, once you get into your top business school, which I know you all are going to have successful application processes after taking this great advice, is stay true to your path, right? And don't get distracted by what's happening around you, and take advantage of the great curricula that are available at these schools to try different things and to be on the ground working on experiential classes, and follow your path. That's something I think sometimes people lose when they start business school, and they start taking the herd mentality of, oh, I have to be applying for that job as well, and that's the golden ticket, when really it's about you and why did you come to business school and what are you hoping to get out of it, and don't lose sight of that. Maybe keep your essay and read it in your, after your first year or after your second year, to remind yourself about why you did this.
So explore, be curious.
Yeah, be curious and stay true to yourself. That introspection that happened before going to business school and deciding to go to business school, continue that as you explore career options.
Right. Well, we've got time for a couple of questions from a curious audience. So who has a question for our panel? And I'll cold call if I need to. Yes, there's a microphone just in the middle if you want to stand up and introduce yourself.
Yes, hi. My name is Rosvita, or Vita, if it's easier for you. I haven't used the microphone in probably 20 years. Quick question, which I have also submitted through the message app or one of those social media thingies that I still have to learn about. Could you kindly, and I haven't had a chance to explore and research all of your majors or concentrations within that your business schools offer. Could you comment briefly on what you are seeing as being a trend, both here, well, you represent Europe and US and Canada, worldwide trend in terms of concentrations for business schools or majors, basically. Just a bit of a reflection in the coming 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Skill sets that the market will appreciate, biz analytics and others. Linda, you obviously have a couple to share on that one.
Yes, I'm so interested because I came in on Porter Airlines. I was sharing with Maria, I saw an advertisement for her school in the back of the little Porter Airline brochure. So it really hit on one of those items that you're looking at. So what's driving business today is innovation, technology innovation. Think about artificial intelligence, business analytics, and security. So those are the three drivers today. Tomorrow, it could be something completely different. But on Maria's brochure, talked a lot about the innovation that's happening now in finance, fintech. We're still trying to find exactly what that is. We know it involves artificial intelligence, but it does also include cryptocurrency. There's all of these. Gosh, yes, it's like I said before, technology is driving so much change and so rapidly. So the question is, when you're considering your MBA, you're never going to be on top of the new change, but you could have a consulting mindset to be a change leader and to drive change. So I would encourage you to look at programs that would give you those types of skill sets to be able to, make that impact.
That's great, because we've got some pointers and things that are hot, but just the mindset that will enable the MBA graduate to keep up with those. Yes. From the European perspective, Ma, what would you identify as some of those emerging sort of skills?
More than from the European perspective, I cannot agree more. I mean, those are the areas, but I would add something that goes to the individual, which is having a growth mindset. Because we know what is in fashion today. I have no idea what's in fashion in the next 10 years. Everything is changing so fast. So what I believe the companies will be looking for is someone that is able to adapt very quickly and to be able to be open to change even career paths and to have different roles during their entire life. I mean, now every 3-4 years we're changing jobs and maybe even somehow switching careers, right? So for me, it's very important what we call the behavioral fitness. So it's how do you have a growth mindset and you're open to change no matter what you do.
And sometimes this year's students are the best barometer of what's coming next. What are some of the most popular electives in the IE program?
I would say technology, anything that is related to big data, and in fintech and all the areas that are related to technology, definitely artificial intelligence, blockchains, cryptocurrencies, cybersecurity, definitely.
Right. Anything that we're missing, JD, in that list? Healthcare?
Yeah, I would just add to it is that, you know, I think the word disruption is sort of a word that's out there now, but disruption has always existed. It's just the speed that that disruption happens. And so I think what's great about an MBA is that it gives you a multidisciplinary degree to move forward. And so what employers are really looking for is employers are looking for individuals that can figure it out, that not only have good judgment and are smart, but they have wisdom. They can kind of see what's coming, what's happening. But you can be thrown in any situation in any industry and you'll figure it out. So I'm a big person in analogy, and I'll use another one. It's like the Swiss Army knife. Right? You're coming out with a bunch of tools. You can throw you in any situation. You'll have a tool for anything. And I think what employers are really looking for are people with those leadership skills. They can work with others, because that is so important now, is your ability to work with others and to get things done, and really bringing just not only strong judgment to a situation, but that wisdom is incredibly important.
Right. Great. Right. It's always tough to go last, right? When three great responses.
Yes, what they said. No, I think the applied research and the changes to experiential education, where it's not just sitting in a classroom receiving a lecture, but going on a study tour, so you get to see the impact in a particular region of the world, or we have a program where you get to sit in on a nonprofit board for 8 months, along with students from other University of Toronto faculties. So you really get to roll up your sleeves and solve real live problems, the messy problems, instead of just something that's happened in the past. And that's something that I think employers highly value, because it shows how you're using your Swiss Army knife to chop up the apple to eat, or whatever the task is. So I think that that's a trend that I expect will be happening in business education and continue to happen.
Right. Now, with all of those answers, one that hasn't come up is climate change, or the environment. Is that actually being threaded through the lens of technology and the lens more of what you're describing? This generation cares about the environment, right?
No, definitely, and within the program, you will see that it is incorporated in the main subjects, and also there is a wide range of opportunities that you have, probably in all the schools, to get involved in the projects that have to do with social impact. It's definitely in the program, and it's there, right? It's one of the trends, whether we like it or not, and so it has to be taken into account, definitely.
Yeah, great. Ingrid, are we still good on time? Have I got time for one more question? Thank you. It's like Mother Christmas. One more question then for the audience. You're going to save your questions for the meet and greet section. I guess in about 5 minutes' time, we'll be looking at the vision of business schools as we head in the direction of business analytics, at disruption, at healthcare that's 17% of GDP. John Byrne will be sitting down with the deans of the Darden School and McGill. And then from 3 o'clock, actually just before 3, all the schools will be up on the stage just to talk a little bit about their schools and why they're here to meet you, talk about you, find out more about your backgrounds. But I would love to thank this panel for such a breadth of insight and sharing. Thank you very, very much, and enjoy the conversations that will come from it later on this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so
much.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good luck.
Okay.
Good.
Good luck. Okay.